Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, the Millennial Investor, and today we're going to answer a question that I get a lot on this channel. I see a lot of people make videos about it, and we're going to be answering how many stocks should you own in your portfolio. So in this video, we're going to be going over a few different topics. We're going to be answering a question from one of my YouTube comments, Wes Nicholson. I'll be going over this. We'll be going over Warren Buffett's diversification is protection against ignorance quote. I'll give my opinions on that and whether or not I think that's true or false. We'll also be going over the actual number of stocks. Should you own 10? Should you own 20? Should you own 100? How many stocks should you own in your portfolio? Should they be stocks? Should they be ETFs? Should they be bonds? We're going to be going over stuff like that. And then last but not least, the last article that we're going to be going over, out of the stocks or ETFs that you should own, should you own them in how many different sectors and how many different industries? Should you all own in the same industry, just two or three, or multiple? And we'll also be going over stuff like owning international stocks. So everything involving diversification, will all be going through that in this video. So as usual, if you enjoy watching my content, you're interested in using M1 Finance, go ahead and use this link right here in the description of all of my videos. You can get $10 for getting started, and I can help you get you signed up for M1 Finance and get you started on your dividend portfolio. 3 days ago, Wes Nicholson wrote a comment that I wanted to answer in one of my upcoming videos, so here you go, Wes. We have two questions. As someone who goes for the old boring stocks, why haven't you invested in the S&P 500? And what are your thoughts on how many stocks are too many? I've seen many YouTubers go straight to the classic Warren Buffett quote, diversification is for the ignorant, but it seems you have another thought process. Okay, so I wanted to go over my answer with that, and I wanted to give basically my opinion on this with Warren Buffett. So you can see he says, diversification is protection against ignorance. It makes a little sense if you know what you're doing. So basically what I usually do for people that I recommend getting started with the stock market, I've had friends, I've had family members that said, Jordan, how do I get started with investing? I have no idea what to start with. Typically what I'm going to do, I would sign them up for M1 Finance, set them up for automatic deposits, and then I would just put 100% buy into VOO or SPY, whichever one they wanted. Particularly VOO is the one I would recommend. But as far as diversification goes, I think to some extent I agree with what Warren Buffett has to say. If you're educated and you know the business, you have a lot less risk than just blindly throwing money at what someone has to say or what opinion you read online. But to some extent, I also don't agree with diversification as protection against ignorance. If you only have 1, 2, 3 stocks in your portfolio, there's definitely going to be some risk that is not associated with that company that is in their control. So let me just give a blind example. I'm just going to pick a random stock in my portfolio. So let's pick Coca-Cola. Okay, Coca-Cola makes a mass majority of their revenue from sugary drinks. So what if, for whatever reason, maybe obesity does get out of control, let's say the US government or many large governments around the world shut down sugary drinks, completely bans them, gets rid of them altogether. What would that do to Coca-Cola's business model? That would completely destroy it. That would take it down so far. I don't think this company would go bankrupt, but you're talking about 30, 40, 50, 60% revenues going down. So like a company like Coca-Cola would pretty much be eliminated overnight if that were to happen. Now with this scenario, I know this is very unrealistic and unlikely. I don't think that'll happen to Coca-Cola, but it's definitely possible. You could give other scenarios like, okay, Johnson & Johnson. One thing that has been highly debated in America is healthcare. Healthcare costs are completely out of control. They're through the roof. So what if they completely reformed healthcare? What if they completely changed the system? What if, for example, if they raised taxes and everybody had free healthcare, and that completely changed the price of all these healthcare products? Well, that is going to dramatically change Johnson & Johnson's business model. Apple is a wonderful company. The purchasing power and the pricing power of Apple is unprecedented. It is completely insane, the amount of prices that they can throw out for cell phones, and people will increase demand for it. Apple has such a large consumer base, but what if, like the same way people went from BlackBerry to Apple, if they completely just get rid of Blackberries and stop using them altogether and flip phones and stuff like that, what if people did the same thing with the iPhones and all the Apple products? I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's very unlikely, but it's definitely possible. There are so many different scenarios and so many different parts of risk that is completely uncontrollable by these companies. One example that I would like to give, if we look up here, ticker symbol KHC, so that is actually a Warren Buffett holding, so this is a perfect example. One thing that Warren Buffett did not know that he can't control, you see here the big drop when it was about $50 a share down to 32 back in 2019. They had some accounting fraud that they were getting investigated by the SEC. So if you take a very dominant company, so let's do Coca-Cola for example. This company is very dominant, they're very huge, and I think that government scenario is very unrealistic for them getting shut down and losing their sugary drinks. But let's say Coca-Cola is a wonderful company. They're not going away anytime soon. And then for whatever reason, their CEO, somebody in upper management, they decided that they wanted to do some accounting fraud. And let's say they started manipulating their stock price and manipulating investors, and it got so bad to the point where the SEC could literally shut them down. That could take the stock to zero overnight. Now, that is very, very, very unlikely that that would happen, but it's a risk. So even with a very safe, stable, what'd you say the words that you used were old, boring stocks. So even with these old, boring stocks, you still get risk in them. So one of the reasons why I don't like to invest in the S&P is that you're exposed to companies that are amazing and horrible at the same time. When you just look at the list of companies that are in the S&P, so we'll just hit research tab and hit stocks, sort by market cap, so that's pretty much going to be all companies that are in the S&P. There's so many companies in here that I love, and there's so many companies in here that I don't like, including non-dividend payers. So first off, we just sort here. You can see a lot of different companies in all different industries and all different types of field. Okay, Netflix, for example, a very high, overvalued growth company that pays no dividend. So if I buy this company, I'll be completely going against my method and my strategy of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get dividend growth companies. So Netflix has no dividend. Adobe has no dividend. Nvidia has a very small dividend. But a lot of these companies are also at risk of cutting their dividends. So like some that I went over recently, Wells Fargo. I sold out of Wells Fargo. I think they're a major risk of cutting their dividend, and I think it's more than likely going to happen any time now. Another one that I give all the time for an example is Chevron. Chevron and Exxon, a lot of the two big oil companies, they have massive dividend yields, and I think they're going to cut them any time now. I'm surprised they've even made it this long. So what about ExxonMobil? ExxonMobil is another example, another oil company that I think is at major risk of cutting their dividend. But overall, I don't like not having control with ETFs in general, including the S&P 500. Not that it's a bad investment whatsoever. If you bet on America, you're always going to be right. That's another Warren Buffett saying. But generally speaking, I just don't like how I have little to no control over what I invest in. Not to mention, regardless of how big or small it is, you're going to have to pay an expense ratio, even if it's as small as 0.03%. That 0.03% you could have had gains on if you just would have invested in yourself and picked your own individual stocks. And I believe the stocks that I picked will outperform the S&P over the long run because of the mixture of growth, of high yield dividend, and just the dividend growth, and just reinvesting my dividends in general. I think I will outperform the S&P. So overall, Wes, that's my answer to your question. I won't invest in the S&P because I like having control over picking individual stocks. Not that it is a bad investment, and I think for 90% of people, I think it's probably the smart way to go. It's just a lot more interesting and a lot more intriguing to give opinions on individual companies. So that's my opinion on that. And with the diversification, going back to that, as far as the number of stocks you should own in your portfolio, should you own 5? Should you own 10? Should you own 100? There are so many different portfolios that I see people send to me, that I see people ask me about. I see people that own only 2 or 3 stocks. I see people that own 10. I see people that own around what I do. I own 30, by the way, for those of you that don't know. And then some people that own literally 70, 80, 90 holdings. For me personally, in my opinion, for my strategy and what I'm trying to do, there is no right answer to this question, but I think generally speaking, 20 to 40, somewhere in that range, is what you should own. Because I think once you get 10 stocks or less or 15 stocks or less, it's a lot harder to become diversified. So I take Broadcom, for example. If Broadcom were to go bankrupt, very unlikely, but let's say they were to go to bankrupt overnight. Let's give that accounting issue like we spoken about with the SEC. So if they were to go to zero overnight, 8% of my portfolio would go to zero. If you had 10 stocks, over 10% of your portfolio would go to zero overnight. That is a massive chunk of your portfolio and would definitely eat at your gains, and it would take you a long time to make that up. If you had 20, 30, 40 stocks in your portfolio, so like with 30, and they were evenly distributed, 3% of your portfolio, that hurts, but you can recover from that pretty quickly. So the thing is, in regards to what is the number of stocks that you should own in your portfolio, there's not a right or wrong answer. It is different for everybody. It depends on your risk tolerance, on what type of industries you're interested in investing in. And speaking of industries that you should invest in, as you can see here with my portfolio, I have technology, I have real estate, I have utilities, I have consumers, I have industrials. There's so many other different categories. I'm split pretty much evenly, I would say, between all different types of industries, and I'm not too exposed to any one thing. I would say, if anything, I would say probably the most I'm exposed to is, I guess, probably consumer or tech. I like those sectors very much, and I like a lot of the companies that are in those, and they're usually pretty easy to understand, generally speaking, to me. But regardless, you should be exposed to a little bit of everything. So, like, for example, one sector that I'm not too keen of is healthcare. I think a lot of people like healthcare stocks a lot more than I do, but I still own Johnson & Johnson. I'm not against healthcare in general. I just don't like the sector as much, so I'm not as exposed to it. But I still love Johnson & Johnson's business model. I love their company, so I will be buying in companies like that. One thing that I see people ask a lot is asking about investing in international stocks. That's one thing that I'm personally not invested in, and it's strictly because I don't know enough about them. It's totally fine admitting that you don't know enough about something to invest in them. I think just generally speaking, with the culture and the governments and all the other risks that go along with investing in foreign investments, including some of the tax penalties, I'm not really interested in owning any kind of foreign investments whatsoever. I highly doubt you'll ever see me own a company that is not based inside the US. And just generally speaking, for me, it's kind of a little bit of a patriotic deal. Since I'm an American, since I support the country that I live in, I want to give my money back to companies that are supportive of jobs here in the US. I don't want to invest in a company in Europe and that potentially help a European country gain jobs. Not that I have anything against them, but I want to support the country that I live in, the state that I live in, and help people get jobs in my own country. So that's just me and that's just my opinion on it. So I'm not really interested in owning international stocks. I know a lot of times, just for diversification purposes, a lot of times people will recommend owning international stocks just for a little bit of diversification. But I think generally speaking, the only real value here in owning international stocks, because most of them do not perform as well as the United States ones, I think the only real benefit here is if the United States was to go under, if they were to go bankrupt, if they were to go belly up, if our country was to go into shambles, you would have some exposure to international companies and you wouldn't be at such a high risk. That's not something I'm interested in, but just keep that in mind. Another thing that I want to point out here in this last article is talking about, regardless of the number of stocks you own, do not have too much money invested in any one of them. If you own 30 stocks, but 50% of your money is in your three largest holdings, you may want to spread it out a bit. This is true, and I've also seen people who show me their portfolios, and they'll have 20 holdings, but the top two will have 25% each in them. It is at such a large weight that it's pretty much like you're investing in just those two stocks, and then the rest is just noise in the background. You can definitely have even weights among all these companies, or you can have some a little bit higher than others. For example, for me, strictly how I make my decisions on the higher or lower weights, I base it off of a couple different things: the dividend growth, the dividend yield, what I think about that company's future for the long term in both share price terms and their sustainability and their economic moat behind them. Like, for example, I think Broadcom, even though they have arguably one of the highest yields in my portfolio, I don't think they're at any risk for cutting their dividend. I think long term with technology, I'm going to be bullish on this company long term. But with real estate, people are going to always need places to live. People are always going to need places to shop. They're always going to be physical retail stores, whether or not they decline or increase over the coming years. Visa. People are always going to need to pay for something somehow, whether that's mobily, whether that's with credit cards, cash. People are always going to need to pay somehow, and I think Visa is going to be the forefront in that. Utilities, people are always going to need electricity. I can just keep going on. There's so many different aspects about these companies that I think they're so bullish long term, and the ones that I have with higher weight percentages, they are the ones that I think are at the best valuations and or I believe in them the most the long term. I don't think any of these companies are going away anytime soon, or I wouldn't invest in them at all. But overall, that's my full opinion with my portfolio and what I think about diversification. I think just generally speaking, as long as you can own at least in double digits in stocks, I think 10 at the absolute minimum is what you probably need to own. What I like to own is usually right around 30. I just happen to own 30 on the dot right now, but usually 25 to 35 is where I like to float. That's an even diversification, and also little enough to where I can keep up with it, because if I were to have 60, 70, 80 holdings in my portfolio, I feel like I would just be owning an ETF and I would know very little about what's going on, and I can still keep pretty up to date with 30 companies. So that's my opinion on that, guys, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to give you a quick update on my portfolio. You can see my top holdings here. The best portfolio holdings that I have in my portfolio is Discover Financial Services, still up triple digits, Whirlpool, Cisco, Home Depot, Realty Income, and then we also have the biggest losers, which are still all in the green. We're up 4.15% on Procter & Gamble. The stock market has been doing very good still ever since that massive jobs report we had the other day, and you can see here my stock has pretty much just been in a straight line up, and we are about to hit pretty close to 2,600. We're about to make some stock purchases here. I'll show you the 13 buys that I have included. We have PepsiCo, Kimberly, Southern, Visa, Procter & Gamble, Dominion Energy, Johnson & Johnson, NextEra Energy, Waste Management, Microsoft, IBM, MAA, and Home Depot. So that's the purchases I'm making right now as we speak, and that'll be added to my portfolio. So overall in the portfolio, we did receive another dividend yesterday. We did just receive a dividend from the Southern Company, and in total now with the recent moves we had in the stock market, we're now up 26.08%. $458 coming from total gains, and we have $441 coming from market gain and $16.77 coming from earned dividends. And we did just hit exactly $2,000 worth of deposits, and we are at $2,540 before these purchases are made. So about $2,600. So about $600 worth of total gains. These are money weighted returns right here, so these numbers are a little bit different than what I like to look at, but overall, guys, things are going very good with the channel, with the portfolio, and as usual, as I like to mention in all of my videos, if you are interested in using M1 Finance and you want to support me, go ahead and use this link down below in the description. It helps me out. It can give me $10 and help fund this portfolio even through the worst of times during this recession. So go ahead and get started investing right there, and we can get $10 just for signing up. And you can get started investing in your dividend portfolio. But just like the comments that I saw here with Wes Nicholson, go ahead and leave me a comment down below because I love to answer questions in my videos about what I think about the market, any questions I have about my portfolio, questions about things like diversification and the S&P 500, and I would love to answer any questions that you guys have down below. So go ahead and leave a comment down below there, and I'll answer every single comment, and I might mention you in the video. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.